Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Recruiter Hangouts. And this is the first episode of our Hangout series where Bill, Vick, and Viral Marketing are going to be working together to bring you really excellent content with experts within the recruiting industry. And just so everyone is aware, Bill Vick is the founder and principal of Vick and Associates. He is a consultant in the recruiting industry and has graciously given his time to work with Viral Marketing to showcase the changes taking place in the recruiting industry right now. He is the co-author of LinkedIn for Recruiting as well as Big Biller, and he's currently going to be using a lot of the fun stuff that we are finding out in these Hangouts to author his third book, which is yet to be named. And welcome, Bill. We also have our wonderful guest today is Doug Beabout, and Doug brings over 30 years of experience in top production, personnel services firm ownership, and industry training. His reputation for training excellence has placed him repeatedly as a guest speaker at the National Association of Personnel Services. Doug currently works with many state-level associations as a featured trainer and speaker at several state conferences. He is a business consultant to many franchised and independent personnel services firms. He is the owner and president of the Douglas Howard Group, a personnel and training services company. Doug works a desk every day and is uniquely qualified as the personnel services industry trainer. Many of his clients have put their net worth on the line to succeed in the personnel services industry and did as a result of his training and guidance. He's previously held the position of Vice President of Training and Development for SRA International, Inc. for 10 years and was responsible for the establishment and success of hundreds of personnel services firms and their staff members. Doug was also the owner and president of a successful contingency, temporary, and retained personnel services firm for 10 years in Dayton, Ohio. He's gained his early placement experience as a personnel services consultant in an independent firm. Doug, did I get everything there, or is there even more accolades that we should be adding in?
Probably not. That's enough. My humility kicks in, so I have to say that's enough. That's enough.
Wonderful. Well,
good job.
Thank you very much. Well, so welcome to the Hangout, guys. I'm very excited to have you both here and to have top minds in the industry coming together like this to help out all of our viewers out there who are in the recruiting industry and looking to better themselves in it. So with that, I know, Bill, you've got some questions that you want to start us off with to talk to Doug about, and we'll get it started.
Well, thank you, Andrew. First I'd like to say, Doug, you and I have known each other for a long time,
Very long time.
Probably 25 years, give or take, a long time.
Oh yeah.
And we've seen this business go through cataclysmic changes in direction and what recruiters do or don't. It's really changed a lot. But I think one of the things, and Andrew talked about your background, which was great, but there's things and nuances about you that I know and you know about yourself. I wonder if you take a second and kind of give that 20,000-foot view of Doug Beabout, because you really do so many different things and you do them all well. How do you see yourself in that elevator speech about Doug Beabout? Who are you and what do you do?
Well, most importantly, I'm a happily married guy with 5 kids. One more to put in college, and then I can go drown bait. I guess on the higher altitude view, it started for me when I was a B-52 pilot. That was very high altitude. But looking at it from high altitude now in that same sense, I run a retained and contained recruiting firm. I was asked once, what do I specialize in? And it's gotten to a point, frankly, where I specialize in collecting fees. But a variety of industries. Over the many years I've done this, over 30 years, I've made some great friendships who are hiring decision makers and industry leaders, and they call upon me whenever they have a critical requirement. So I do a great deal with retained search and contained search. I also do a couple more things. I have a business called Recruiter eLearning, where I do online training. I do coaching one-on-one, quite a bit of that, and mentoring for both rookies and veterans. Interesting conditions are driving the veterans to look for more coaching than they might have wanted to in the past. This other thing I do is called Career Talk Guys. And Career Talk Guys is simply what it sounds like. It's a business that helps people learn from a headhunter's perspective. How do you find a job? And it's really not common knowledge, although much of it is common sense. And finally, within that same realm, I do a great deal with warriors, wounded warriors, and the veterans that are coming back, particularly in helping them find work, helping them take advantage of the different state programs that will help them get a great opportunity, and how they can transition from a warrior to a worker.
Well, that's Doug. I can't tell you how much that grabs and touches me, because I understand exactly what you're doing, and like many others of us in the recruiting industry, I admire what you're doing and respect it. You know, going back to that 20,000 foot view, and I think you put in a great metaphor with your experience in the Air Force and all of that. But if I would ask you, hey Doug, what's your mission statement? What are you really focused on in what you're doing? What would that be?
To become my client's trusted advisor.
Excellent. All right. You know, we've looked at this business over the years and seen it go through change after change. And
Right.
it all started out with a model invented by, I think, a guy, Alan Schoenberg, in Cleveland, Ohio, who built a company called Management Recruiters International. And that basic model, which shifted employment from being an industry where people paid others to find them a job, being in employment paid fees, to a business where companies started hiring recruiting experts to find people and paid them fees. And that business is a young business. It's, what would you say, 45 years old, give or take?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I remember the day it changed, so I would say about 39 years, 40 maybe.
Maybe 40 years.
We went from the applicant paid fee to the employer paid fee.
That's right. And that was a fairly fast shift and change. And then it kind of rocked along for many years in the 70s and the 80s. And all of a sudden, this whole thing called social media came on the scene. And I think it probably started for most recruiting people with LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
In that LinkedIn changeover and that whole social media thing that's taking place, how do you see that playing with your clients, with those recruiting firms that you coach and work with your own business? How is social media, how has it impacted that business, and how do you see it changing it?
Well, I think, you know, social media being a very big area of discussion, you did mention the pinnacle, which would be LinkedIn. Initially, LinkedIn tried to become the Sears catalog for the talent pool, and it was utilized as well as it should have been as a networking tool between executives. What I have seen happen, though, is going back to the introduction of social media, email, texting, the internet, job boards, anything that's got to do with the keyboard, offered a lucrative process for people in the day to find candidates, even find searches, put it together, and make a living doing that. But the conditions that drove that to success are dramatically different today, which has pulled the power plug on LinkedIn, and it's really a shadow of its former self. We use LinkedIn in my search firm. I have 2 full-time researchers who know how to use LinkedIn in a very intelligent manner, but it is not a water well you go to find talent. It's a great place to check out people when you want to, and you know, the pre-marketing effort, to check on a candidate just to see. But what I find and what my researchers find is that there's been abject neglect over the past 5 to 6 years with LinkedIn, and that's, I think, evidenced by looking at just about anybody's profile, and it'll be 1 or 2 jobs out of date. Point being, the population shift drove a change in the way social media is being utilized. The baby boomers were the first group to embrace social media, websites, Twitter, everything. Now, it still exists as a very positive element in our society. It certainly does things like drive presidential elections, but in terms of recruiting and talent acquisition for our friends in human resources, as well as our friends in our industry of third-party recruiting, the keyboard has been replaced by a tool that I was given the day I started. And that tool, although it's not well known anymore, is a telephone. And you literally have to go with the old Ma Bell, the Yellow Pages, the AT&T thing about reach out and touch someone. Well, I started, Bill, when rotary dial phones were what we used.
Oh, spinning the dial, right? Spin the dial.
Yeah, and reversing it quick as you could so that you could get the next number out. Then push-button phones. And then, of course, Al Gore invented the internet, and we all sailed into the sunset. But the problem is, as baby boomers started departing, initially because they were the more expensive worker during an economic downturn, followed by the very fact that many of them hit retirement age, followed by the fact that there's a bit of recovery going on right now. I wouldn't say it's worth getting excited about economically, but what's driven success for us in recruiting is that in spite of the fact that a company may not have positive sales, they may have some looming dark clouds on the horizon, there's such a severe shortage of people that they will fill a job and retain me to fill it even under those conditions. In the years past, when you and I cut our teeth in recruiting, and when Alan Schoenberg was running MR and Jerry was doing the training, what we had was a recruiting market driven by economic growth. And it was being fueled by a supply of baby boomers, which in the math of it all, just under 80 million people constitute the baby boom. We didn't have kids. We had some, obviously. We didn't have as many as our forefathers had. As Brokaw referred to our parents as the greatest generation, they were great at having kids. And so it created this little boom in babies. Now, we wanted BMWs when we grew up. We wanted Club Med vacations and condos at Hilton Head and both the silver and the gold Rolex and on and on and on. And what we didn't seem to want as much of were children. I got 5, so I'm an anomaly in my generation. But frankly, the average, I believe, was 1.1 children per family. So Gen X, which is the progeny of the baby boomers, represents slightly less than half the number of human beings in that population group. And in the United States, in most of the free world, in Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, we have this issue of having a very small group of people. The unemployment rate, Bill, which a lot of folks are surprised to hear, among professionals, and categorically defined as 25 years of age and older, with 4 years of college or more, and for me, that defines the candidate pool. Also, the rule of thumb that 20% of a generation is likely going to be professional. So what they're saying to us in raw numbers, and you can go to the BLS.gov, BLS.gov, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and look up the numbers. They're there. The unemployment rate is 2.4%. Now, in practical analysis of that, it says that 2 or 3 out of 100 people aren't at work right now in the professional jobs. And Bill, in my nearly 40 years of doing this for a living, I've always seen at least 2 or 3 people that wouldn't work no matter what. So I think it's practical, it's reasonable to assume, it's actually prerequisite to assume, that 97% of the talent pool is at work. They are working extended hours. They're in a work environment across the board where they're understaffed under-resourced, and overworked. The good news, 80% of the professional pool is motivated for change. The bad news, they're working 55-hour weeks plus. They're working Saturday mornings. They're putting in a lot more hours. And they had a lot of kids. They had the next boom, Gen Y, 82 million people. So that proves something. This workforce that we need to recruit is one, they're at work. Two, they're very busy. Three, they don't go home at night and spiff up their internet presence. They go home at night and spend time with family. Not near as many nannies around right now as there used to be back in the 80s. So I think it's imperative that the biggest change I've seen in our industry is this evolution from the burgeoning days of employers paying us a fee to collect the talent and provide it to a downturn economically and a crash that started at the turn of the century. Pretty bad recession 8 years later. And since then, a sort of crawling recovery, but yet great demand for recruiting. Here's the difference. If you're going to be successful today, you have to adopt the fundamental practices that involve telephones and people and interaction. That's how we do it. It's really and truly considered a pretty refreshing approach. When I call candidates at work, I'm stunned at how many of them say, really? I didn't know you guys call people at work anymore.
You know, one of the things you've done, probably better than most, is created a model. You mentioned it briefly. You have researchers, kind of, I'm going to call them the front line of your organization. What is their role, job, and how do they play into your concept of being on the phone and building relationships and managing the process? Where do the researchers, you're labeling them researchers, other people might call them sourcers, they have a junior recruiters, a whole long list of titles.
Right.
How do your researchers work with you, and why do you continue to use them? You created that, for all intents and purposes, I think you created that model. You're the first person 10, 12 years ago I heard talk about using researchers as part of your strategy, and you've maintained it. Why do you maintain it, and how do you use them, and what do they do?
Okay. There really are two things we can sell, Bill, as recruiters: time and information. Any other element that could be brought into the discussion is nothing more than a tangent off of time and information. Now, I can't create more time. I need to do everything a process demands from the onset of a search assignment, or from the onset of marketing to get one, through the closure of the deal and the follow-up. And in between, there are countless steps that need to be taken and done with due diligence and done with zero defects for me to provide the value that I promise and the results that are sought. In order to do that, I would be working 50 or 60 hours a week like my candidate pool, and I would be doing a great deal of busy work, detail work, and grunt work that takes time from me. And so my researchers do, simply put, they are an extension of Doug Beabout. I have one that's very technical. I have another that's very gregarious. And between the two of them, I have the perfect researcher. And so, you know, whether it's Ann or it's Maria, they will establish their own relationships with hiring decision makers. They establish their own relationships with candidates and referrers. They provide me with the refined information I need to talk to only three kinds of people: people that pay my fee, people I can place, and the people who can refer me to the other two people. And that's what I do for a living. I have this blessing of having these two wonderful researchers who I trained from scratch, giving me back the ability to necessarily, simply, easily double my output. I hit a ceiling of about 350,000 a year about 20 years ago. I couldn't break that no matter what I did, no matter how long I worked. I just didn't have the time in the day. And so I hit my head against the wall like most of us do for a little bit of time until maybe I hit it just right. And the thought came to me, why don't you figure out what's taking your time? So I did. And I broke it down into the art of the deal and the demands of the process. I do the art of the placement. The girls or guys that are researchers do the process requirements. And together, we give a value proposition that's unequaled to our clients.
Doug, would you label yourself a rainmaker?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, that's in the general definition of a rainmaker. Yeah, I am. But fairness is due here. Couldn't say that without having both of my researchers at it full time.
I apologize. I have absolutely no idea what that is on my computer. It's going crazy. Somebody's trying to call me on Hangouts. I am so sorry. I apologize.
That's okay. Kind of a little bit of rhythm in there. It was kind of nice.
It's all right. That was like the halfway little like dance break.
But what you're saying, Doug, is I tell you why it's so intriguing to me, because I think you have probably as much as anybody I know. You've come up with a formula. You've come up with a way to move beyond yourself and multiply your efforts through others and focus on the crux and the focal point of the business, which is making placements. It's not just getting job orders, and it's not just getting candidates, it's making placements. Your time is spent making placements, and you've now found a way to spread out your efforts through others. You can only make money in this world two ways. You make people work for you, or you make money work for you. I mean, that's really what the crux is. You've done it. You've come up with a formula. You've been doing it a long time that I know of, but it should be called the Doug Beabout formula, because I'd never heard of it before you did it, and you do. Why don't other people do this?
Well, thank you. That was a very nice accolade. Bill, look, one of the reasons I became a trainer was actually at the suggestion of a guy who I have endless respect for, Terry Petra. Many of our listeners probably have no idea who Terry is. But Terry was, for a long time, a highly respected trainer in the industry that tried to bring an air of professionalism to an industry that was sort of transactional. And he suggested that I do it. Well, my motivation wasn't because I was asked to. My motivation came from that time, every time I pick up that phone, and every recruiter that's watching this knows, when you pick up that phone and you try to reach out and touch someone, there is a negative stereotype of recruiters. And that word recruiter has become a trigger word that illuminates that stereotype. And I honestly felt from the beginning that if I could do something to help people improve their practices, their ethics, their behavior in a way that made more money for them, that would have a reduction impact on that stereotype. And for the many that I have trained, which is almost a micro percentage of all the industry, it has made a huge difference. And it has created for them the kind of success that they want, and the kind of success their clients want, and the kind of respect and loyalty of their candidates. I wish I could just infuse this model and this process and the techniques into anybody in the industry that wanted them, but I'm kind of limited in my means to do so because of travel and all that other stuff. It's not going to be the Doug Beabout Roadshow.
Well, so let me put it a different way. I'm going to call this a just supposing question.
Yeah.
Just supposing Bill Vick, a recruiter, says, hey, that's a great idea. I'm going to get a couple of researchers and have them help me on that front end of that process and fill my tunnel, my tunnel and my funnel, and let me spend my time making placements. What are the steps I'd have to take? Who do I look for? How do I train them? How do I motivate them? How do I pay them? How do I do all that stuff?
Well, therein lies the hitch for most people. Researchers are erroneously thought of as great admin people. And not to stereotype, like I don't like being stereotypes, I'm not trying to, but the fact is many administrative people are not invested in the work they do. They do a good job, they work hard, they leave, and they forget about it. A researcher has to be that unique person with the right personal characteristics and values that will drive them to do what a researcher must. So the whole thing begins, Bill, with learning how to find, evaluate, and hire a researcher. It's not as most people assume. You're not going to run an ad in Craigslist and come up with 10 people and pick one. It doesn't work that way. So there is a process. It's actually free if you want to know what the process is. You can go to researcherelearning.com, not recruiter, but researcherelearning.com, and there's a free introductory webinar that speaks in detail to that process. So, if you want to learn how to find them, that's how you find them. They are more difficult to locate than a good admin person. But they're people that when you find them, jump on the opportunity because it's so interesting and it's so challenging and it's so creative and you have such a free hand at doing what you need to do that it just makes any administrative role for which they may otherwise be qualified pale deeply by comparison. So that's kind of the nutshell. As far as training a researcher, that's another mistake a lot of people make, is they hire one, they have the researcher sit next to them for a couple of days, got any questions? No? Okay, here's your desk. And then they spoon feed them little things they have to do, and all that does is keep someone untrained and busy. They need to know the process they're supporting. They need to know how it works, what it depends on, and what they can do to bring to the table the value necessary for that process to work. And so they need to have formalized training in research from A to Z.
Doug, would it be fair in making the assumption that as we've seen our business fragment and change, that the whole concept of what people call sourcers are in many ways what you're referring to as a researcher? And there are people that exist today that are doing a great job as sourcers, and they've treated it as a business, a job unto itself. Would that be the kind of person you're talking about?
Yes and no. Okay. There are, the labels abound here, but a sourcer can range from someone in a foreign country in a call center who's selling names at $2 a piece to some recruiter in the States who wants product engineers in pressure-sensitive adhesive or whatever. And they will do it cheap. And they'll get you a name and they'll get you an email address or a phone number. And that's pretty raw information. That's what most people, I think, who are sourcers do. Now, there's some domestically, of course. But that's about 5% of what my researchers do. And so for them to really bring value, to actually double your creative time and double your resultant income, they have to have a lot more than providing names or developing an accurate target list of companies from which to recruit. They have to be experts on the community for which you're recruiting, the company for which you're recruiting. They have to understand the candidate's personal setup and the candidate's family requirements. We walked the whole thing through. We hold the candidate's hand and we hold the client's hand until they hit the altar.
Are they typically compensated on a salary or a salary commission or how does that?
There are two parts to their job. One of it, of course, is to do the administrative work I alluded to earlier. For that, I pay them a salary, or in my case, I pay them hourly. big question always pops up is how much is that? And the answer is take the median hourly rate for an administrative assistant in your locality. If you don't know how to do that, very quick tip. Call 3 temporary services firms and ask them. They'll know. Start with that as your baseline. Pay them so much an hour and explain to them there's going to be a lot of grunt work and detail work you have to do, and that's why I'm paying you by the hour. However, as you develop your skills, as you expose yourself to the world, you're going to also have to develop some creative talent. That creative talent is going to lead you to candidates. That creative talent is going to lead you to employers who could become a client. So my compensation goes like this. First 90 days, you get your hourly rate. It takes them that long just to figure out where the coffee pot is and get their head into the game. And then after that, I open the door to their own referrals. So if a researcher is compensated to bring me a search lead, that if that search lead turns into a placement, I give them 5% of the fee. If they bring me, the more common scenario, they bring me a candidate lead, it's going to be pretty well refined by the time I get it. It's at a point where all I need to do is pick up the phone, discuss the opportunity, and answer questions. They get 5% of that placement should that candidate they found get hired, and there's only one rule. If the person did not exist in my database the day you found them, you get your commission. And if for a year they're not placed, you lose your right to commission on it. So there's a 1-year ownership rule on both candidates and clients. And if anything, I find that knowing that they have this incentive which could very quickly eclipse their hourly income, they get very creative. They think very creatively, and they start raising those antennas up so that they know, hey, I'm talking to someone. This person is a hiring decision maker. I would like to know how they're doing, and I'm just going to engage in a personal conversation to see if they're hiring. And then maybe take it to the next level and to the next, and then they learn the art of the dialogue. And I train them to do that, but again, I cannot overemphasize this. As self-promoting as it sounds, they need expert training as a researcher, not as a name grabber, not as a database manager, not as a CRM or a ATS system manager, but as a researcher. All of the aforementioned tools have to also be done by the researchers.
Okay, Doug, thank you so much for that, by the way. That was very generous, very open of you to share that information. The other area that I know you use in your business is social media. And one of the questions I guess I have just personally is here we are, we're talking back and forth on a video network on Hangouts on Google, each other, and we're forming a different kind of a relationship. Do you use video at all in your business with a candidate and or clients?
Oh yeah. I do a lot of Skype video. Haven't actually used this much, and I probably will be, thanks to Andrew's introduction, I'll probably be utilizing Hangouts more. I like the interface. But we use Skype. I have clients in Scotland. I have clients in Johannesburg, Cape Town, Shanghai, Singapore. So Skype's a very good tool. I think that it transcends the conversation when you see people. Now, the irony of this, Bill, is we developed the art of ourselves, our practice, by learning how to read people with a telephone in our hand. And it got to a point, I'm sure with you too, where you could pretty much visualize what the person looked like based on how they spoke on a phone and what they said and how they communicated. Now, we've come full circle where we need to now get that back. I remember the early days of local recruiting and you would run out to the employer in the local area and introduce yourself and bring along your glossy brochure and sit down with HR and sit down, well, personnel is what they call it, but sit down with them and maybe meet a plant manager, a hiring manager. That personal contact always made a big difference. So I think social media has really helped me with that. It's just easier to trust and believe a face than a voice.
Well, the other side of that is, and I guess the other question I have is, I know you're using it with clients, and I'm kind of assuming you do some of that with candidates as well, particularly if they're remote or long distance. How about Doug Beabout, your company, your business? Do you do any branding? Do you use video at all on LinkedIn or Facebook or any of the social media sites to brand your presence, your company, and what you do?
Oh, sure. No, I also do training classes or webinars or whatever they're called, anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour long. And once that's completed, I often embed a link in LinkedIn, on Facebook, and in other places so that it becomes more prolific. I don't do like the 60-second Doug Beabout video clip. And it's not that I wouldn't, I just don't, because I don't see the merit in it. I'm in a business where I'm dealing with C-level people and executive vice presidents and that kind of retail advertising, which is a wonderful thing if you're selling something like that. I'm in a completely non-transactional business. It is all relationship. It is all trust bond. To your question about my mission statement, to become my client's trusted advisor, couldn't be clearer, couldn't be more accurate than that. Mm-hmm. So I like using it to talk to them. Candidates, most of the candidates I place are, well, I can't say this anymore. I place people where they're needed. In the last 5 years, I actually placed a factory technician. Most of them, though, are going to be senior level individual performers, some managers, a great deal of directors and VPs and EVPs, and maybe 10% are in the C-suite. Those candidates, as you well know, image is important. If my client makes the proverbial chicken dinner out of image, then I'm going to use video interviewing so I can see how they act, so I can see how they react to curveball, so I can see how they look when they're stressed. And that way I can get a good analysis. But really what I use it for is to then turn around after that session, send them a copy of it, let them see how they looked, and then give them a verbal critique.
That's brilliant.
And it really makes them better interviewees.
Yeah. I guess the last question, and I want you to think about it for a second, even though you may not have to. You'll probably just come right up with the answer. But if you look in that Doug Beabout crystal ball, if you look down the road 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, as we're going through changes in our economy, in the world, in our business, how do you see the recruiting business looking and focusing and shaping and changing? What's it going to be like to be a recruiter 2 years, 5 years down the road?
Okay. It's a complicated answer, but conditions are complicated. For the next 2 years, 5 years, even 6 years, we're facing a accurately projected shortfall of professionals versus open requirements for them in our country, and that's based on zero growth. So if our economy just flatlines for 6 years and we don't go bankrupt as a result, there's going to be a massive demand for third-party direct recruiting. There's going to be an equivalent downturn in electronic recruiting, in people who gather a dozen resumes and fire them off and see what sticks. You know, when they could mail them, they did, and when they got email, they used that. So that very large portion of the third-party recruiting industry who's limited, either by choice or by circumstance, to very transactional processes and practices, is going to see their industry dry up underneath them. Companies today are turning towards the recruiters who can become an extension of their company, of the opportunity, of the company's culture, of the community that's involved, on an accurate, detailed, due diligent level. That's not even available through the majority of our industry. I'm not trying to pick on my own peers here, but I think if we're all honest with each other, we don't predominantly practice this business as we should. And as long as you and I have been in this business, every time something goes up, there's people that run in. And every time something goes south, there's people that run out. And I don't know what they do in the meantime. It might be welcome to Jones BMW or welcome to Walmart, but they're not in recruiting. Right now, we're kind of at an ebb in that flow. I expect that it to be an exodus of the people who do not know what is commonly referred to as the process. They don't know it, they won't survive the next 2 to 5 years. There will be companies that simply won't pay them a fee. Here's where it gets scary. The Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Department of Labor are projecting, based on demographics, based on hundreds of thousands of professionals that are polled, in conjunction with the Federal Reserve System, they're projecting 6 to 8 million professional jobs in this country in 4 years, and there won't be people in our population to conduct those jobs, to do those jobs. That's I think, a pretty scary notion and almost a national crisis. So it's going to drive everybody in recruiting to be much more efficient at it, much better at it, and more compelling. It's going to drive employers to become recruiting organizations, not just hiring organizations. And we'll work it through. We always do. Whenever impossible comes up, recruiters make it doable. So in the long run, there'll never be a replacement for us. There's never going to be a technologically advanced way to call someone at work, interrupt their day, and say, picture yourself sitting in a situation where this and this and this is going to happen for you in about 12 months. And now that spotlight's on you, and you're going to be given great attention and a grand opportunity to move up in the organization. Is that a position for which you might qualify? Knowing fully that this person, in a matter of 2 to 3 months, is going to sell their house, move their family, pull their kids out of school. Spouse employment has to change. They have to deal with the housing market they're in and when they're going to. A lot of them are going to be upside down in their mortgages. They still are. Now, to fill 6 million or 8 million jobs more than the pool possesses, I'll tell you what's going to happen. The very brightest, the best professionals that are out there are going to be given the best opportunities of their career over the next 5 years. Companies that don't jump into the game as recruiting companies, not just employers, if they're not willing to partner with a search firm who's good at what they do and trustworthy, they're going to find that they're not going to fill jobs. And there are projections of large numbers in the hundreds of thousands of companies, small and large, that may very well fail as organizations because they just don't have the manpower. They don't have the staff to do what technology has driven them to need to do. So that's my vision of the future. It's going to be chaos. And after the Gen Xers get seated up into the C-suite and the SVP and EVP. Millennials are now in the midst of their careers. I don't know. I don't know what's going to come from the millennials. I hear a lot of bad press about millennials, you know, the entitlement generation and all that. And I think that's just what it is. It's bad press. Bill, one thing you and I learned was in our parents' generation, in our generation, in Gen X, there is always that 10 to 15% of that group who rise to the top, who become masters of their own future, and who become assets to organizations, and sometimes almost incalculably great assets. Millennials are going to produce them. And if 85% of them aren't like that, frankly, I don't care, because there'll be enough people there for me to pick what I want. Here's the big time challenge thing. I don't want this to be too confusing, but 5 to 6 years, big shortage, companies in jeopardy, transitions have already been made where people want to work. You better know a good process. You better be empowered with information at its best, or you're not going to lure anybody out of anything. Now, here's where it gets complicated. It's about the same time frame when the millennials should become contributors, should become that top 10 or 15% should start becoming formulated and more visible. And hopefully, if they can get mentored over the next 4 or 5 years, we can avert what I think could be a national crisis for having that big a shortage. Now, the other option is this. We do a brain drain from other countries. Right now, until we straighten out a few wrinkles, that's going to be near to impossible. There are too many political and security issues out on the table for us to just openly start importing people from other countries. I remember many, many years ago when IBM was hot on third-party cash reimbursement for healthcare. We were really short of talent in that area, and a good friend of mine, Jim Downs in North Carolina, set up a business where all he did was import these folks, put them up in their own apartments, got them a car, got them the visa they needed to work, and put them to work for 6 and 12-month assignments until they got their green card, and many of them now are U.S. citizens. But that was the only way he could fill those jobs. And they were being hired by the big six at that time. And the Fortune 50, they really have to rethink the way they attract talent. Somebody that works for, and name any company, I won't, but anybody that works for one of those companies where you go, yeah, I know who they are, still harbors this. You know, they pay a lot of attention to culture, Bill, but what they don't yet know is when someone comes in to be considered for an opportunity in that company, you have to start selling from the minute you meet them until they want the job. And I will throw this advice out to any employer right now. If you can recruit everyone you meet to want the job you have to offer, at the end of the process, you'll be able to pick from everyone you met the one you really want, not have to settle for the one you think is most likely going to accept it. And where would a great employer want to be? The former or the latter? I think they want to pick from the best they see, the one they want. But it requires them to do things that are not being done by HR, they're not being done by hiring managers, and it's something they can learn from folks like you and me who are experienced, seasoned executive search consultants. I don't have a problem with the name headhunter. It's sort of a used sometimes as an insult. Sometimes it's used as a term of great respect. You know, where that term came from was the great blue silk slipper firms like Ernst, Spencer Stewart, Ward Howe, Christian and Timbers, all of the big ones. That's what they were referred to by their Ivy League market as headhunters. So I don't have a problem being called a headhunter. I don't care what you call me. I just care if you remember my bank account.
Hey, Doug, I have to tell you, what a great time talking to you, and you nailed it. You nailed it. Any recruiter that listens to this, listens to it, is going to walk away with a whole new perspective on their business and the whole new looking with a whole different positive view at the future. What a great interview. I want to thank you so much. So much.
What a pleasure and an honor to be here. I hope everybody that does watch this, who knows they need that help, reach out and find it. And I don't mean just come to Doug Beabout. Of course I want you to come to Doug Beabout. I'm really good at it. But there are other people in our industry that can also help them.
Hey, Doug, I got a quick question for you. Is the best way to reach out to you going to be recruiterelearning.com or dougbeabout.com?
Recruiterelearning.com is a great waiting station for people to go see what's available, read references, get feedback, and then a sister site, which is researcherelearning.com. It's the same for the people that need researchers. But Recruiter eLearning is the best one. Best way to reach me is the way I've always been best reached. 850-660-6292. I am a telephone junkie.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank both of you very much today. Bill, great job with your questions, and thank you very much. And Doug, of course, really excellent information there. Thank you very much for being our guest today on the Hangout. I just wanted to let everyone know who is watching this that going forward we are planning on doing a lot of these live. So if you want to join us on live broadcasts, of course you can ask questions that way. If you have feedback for the Hangout, we're always looking for it, and you can reach me at my email, which is just my name, andrew.alex, Alex with an I, at getvyral.com. That's GETVYRAL. With that, thank you very much, Doug. Bill, anything you'd like to add?
I just want to one more time say thank you, Doug. I knew Doug would have words of wisdom and insights that nobody else has, and he came through.
Thank you, Bill. You and I go way back, and our respect is mutual, believe me.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot, guys, and we'll see you next time on the Recruiter Hangouts.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.